So, welcome to this special meeting of the Concord Municipal Light Board. We have some interesting agenda items to take up today, and we could jump right into it. We have several sets of minutes. John, do you want to explain what we have to review and approve?
Yes, I've distributed minutes for the August 13th, August 26th, and September 10th meetings. Happy to entertain any comments or proposed edits. And if there aren't any, not seeing any, then I'd propose that I would make a motion that we approve those minutes.
I thought the minutes looked great, and I'll second.
Great. Any comments before we vote?
Nope.
Chris, you could go first.
Yes.
Brian
Yes.
and John
Yes.
and Bianca,
Yes.
and I say yes as well. Okay, well, let's go on to next agenda item. We've been making good progress on the transition to time of day rates, but it's a big transition and there's a lot still to be done. And so there are some issues for us to discuss in terms of the schedule and what will make the most sense to ensure that everybody in town understands the new system before we put it in place. Let me turn it over to Jason.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen and walk you through a short presentation on this. Warren, can you see my screen?
Yep, got it.
Great. So I'm just going to jump through. Next slide shows kind of some goals for what we're going to talk about. So as a reminder, again, I think it's, even though the board knows this is very redundant information, it's really important that we say this as often as we can, what time of day rates are and why we're doing this. So we're going to talk a little bit today about just an overview, and then some customer outreach and education, things that we need to take care of, and then the other steps that we need before we can actually go live. So time of day rates obviously are rates that vary based on the time of day when you use electricity, and consumers will pay more for energy when it costs us more to get, and they will pay less for energy when it costs us less to get. The benefits to consumers, obviously, one is more equity because you're paying for energy when you use it. And so you're not being subsidized by others, and you're not subsidizing others. So the other thing is that you have a little bit of control over your energy when you use it, and that you can maybe affect your bill if you can shift to some of those off-peak times. There's also an environmental benefit, which is that, the peak power is often the dirtiest power, and by lowering the peak, then the energy consumed by all will be cleaner. So we have three major buckets of things that we have left to do. The first one is the customer outreach and education, and this is the one that I think we feel the most concern over right now in terms of the timeline. Time of day rates were slated originally to go live in January of 2026. And we have concerns about the amount of time we have to get this information in front of customers and consumers before changes happen. We know that the board took a two-phase approach so that customers will be eased gradually into this, but it's a radical shift and will result in a lot of people trying to understand and make sense of their new bills and the new billing system. So the things that we need to do are get information about this program in front of people, and the ways we're doing that is we've hired a marketing firm to help us with a campaign. They have done this before, specifically for time of day rates, so they're well versed in it. They have a lot of materials already produced and content that's already made, and a lot of experience in making sure that they get to as many people as possible. So that's great. There will be email and social media campaigns where graphics and information explainers will be sent out to people. There will be direct mailings or bill inserts for several bills that explain what's coming. We've also been working on calculators and other tools that will help people understand how they can shift their load, what types of appliances or things in their house they can change easily to save, as well as some of the programs that they can enroll in, like connected homes, where with little to no interaction from themselves, they can really affect their rates. We also have interviews and videos planned, events like the League of Women Voters. I just did a podcast with the deputy town manager discussing time of day rates that should be launching in the next week or two. So it's the familiar places, the Concord Can, the CAC, all the places where people discuss energy policy, environmental concerns that we, can help spread the message, and then they can spread it to the folks that they interact with on a regular basis. And then also internal team training, which can't be stated in terms of the importance. Every CMLP employee needs to understand this program and be able to convey it to customers, because we will have line workers asked when they're doing repairs. We will have customer service specialists asked when they're on the phone. We will have our utility electrician asked when customers ask about a high bill. So we need all staff to understand the messaging around this and make sure that they have been trained adequately. When rates were voted back in July timeframe, we were anticipating that we could move directly to bill programming and messaging. Obviously, there was some necessary time it took to clarify and understand those rates. There was an error to fix from UFS. So it took some time, and we just voted, most rates in early September, which leaves just about 3 months from now. The next thing that we need to do is take our new advanced meter data that gives us that hourly usage data and make sure that it gets into the right buckets in the billing system. Before we can even do that, though, we need to make sure that we fill any coverage gaps with our new system. Now, there is, communication issues that we need to make sure are addressed. We're feeling pretty good that we're in the right direction there. I will tell you that, our project with Eaton is not closed. And that's because they're still doing some analysis and working on the project with the water department as well for water meters. But they're doing a contract review. They guarantee 99.5% of hourly readings every month. And they need to prove to us that they've met that obligation. And if not, they need to remedy it by adding additional equipment or making some tweaks. And there's a few problem pockets, and then there's several customers that we just need to investigate. Eaton is doing that, and they hope to come back to us in October, kind of mid-October, to give us a plan for either saying we've addressed the issue with software, or you need to add some equipment that we'll pay for, and here's where you need to add it. And then we'll go through a month and then verify that that's working. Once we have all the data we need to bill customers, we need to take it from our metering system over to our billing system and make sure that the logic and the programming that's doing that is accurate, and making sure that the bills are coming out appropriate. And to do that, every year when we program rates, the customer service team, Donna and Carol and others, would spend a lot of time vetting the new rates. And we have test databases. We would run simultaneous bills. We'd take a look at the difference. We'd pull out some to do some manual testing. We'd add up, in cumulative, what we expect the numbers to be versus what they are. And that process usually took a few weeks. We'd usually vote rates in early December, and then they would go live in that first billing in January. So that process takes about a month, and we really can't start that until we have all of the first two boxes checked, which is the data in the metering system and the data validated, moved over to the meter data management system. Today, we don't need a meter data management system because it's just total usage for a given month. And then the last thing is that we're working on as a big push is working with our billing vendor which is NISC, to make sure that the new bill presentation looks as the board, stated they preferred it to look, that it has the right graphs, that it has the right QR codes. The bill print programming is a unique beast, something we don't have direct control over. As I think I mentioned before, NISC advises about a year to year and a half lead time for a complete bill redesign. We didn't have that amount of time, so we opted for a kind of limited bill redesign, which gets us most of the elements that we were trying for. but maybe it isn't as comprehensive as we would have liked. And that process can start now, basically, to say, like, how can we envision the bills? And luckily, we'll have a lot of data to base that on, in terms of decision points and presentation. But, the bare elements, the bubbles, the tables, the graphs, and, the QR codes, any other images, static images, they're working on all of that, and we do have a case and a work order open with them to get that work done. And we've worked with our graphic designer to come up with some new time of day, clock looking things that explain to people when the peak is and when the off peak and the super off peak is. And then obviously, once we design that, it's testing it and ensuring the accuracy. And the next slide I have here is just, what we think of as success for this project. Number one, a very well-informed customer base. That's going to lead to fewer complaints, fewer questions, fewer concerns from customers, not knowing what's going on and seeking clarification. We also want, by the same token, a well-informed staff so that they can answer and address all of those questions. If everybody has the same information and gives the same information to customers, there's going to be a consistency of messaging and a clarity. The technical tools that are validated and perfected, we want the calculators to be accurate and any other tools or programs to be working well. I think I'll mention too, just parenthetically, that the Connected Homes program went live with some new vehicles and batteries recently. So we'll be doing some more announcements on that, but that's good news just to get more supported devices out there for customers. And then that we have validated all of those integration points between the meter data management and the billing system primarily. Tests and pilots, we talked about pilot programs and pilot billing, and that there may be not enough time to do that. But we, as part of our normal billing process every year when we update the rates, we kind of do that because we'll do a run and we'll check things. The question is, like, how formal is the pilot where customers are maybe getting two bills, or we could print, a second time of day bill for somebody and look at that with them. With more time also comes a little bit of analysis. We will probably have an idea on go live day whose bills will be changing the most, and that could give us an opportunity to maybe craft some special messaging to folks. We also understand that sometimes when you roll out a new program, you get all the questions at the program rollout. We do anticipate waves of questions as seasons change for that first year or two, because if we go live in January in the middle of heat pump season, there's going to be a certain list of people whose bills change favorably or unfavorably who will have questions. But then in the spring, there may be a different group, and then the summer, there would be a different group. And the same thing if we went live in April, where temperatures are more mild, and then later the summer picked up and air conditioning is ramped up. So might have different concerns at different times of the year. And then finally, just, I think the board has declared many times that the preference is for clarity, for understanding, for simplicity, just in terms of the presentation, so that people are not overwhelmed. It's a big change. There's a lot of information out there. We want to provide that information in layers so that people can first easily digest it, but then know where to go to get more information if they want to dive into that. In terms of the risks, we've got 3 months basically from go live. And, originally we were thinking that would be more of a 6-month. The messaging directly to customers was going to be a 90-day prior to go live, a 60-day, and a 30-day prior to go live. But that was going to be after we had that initial wave of outreach to the public with news and notices, with those interviews, with getting the word out to different boards and committees. And so we are on a very tight, short timeline if we stick to that January 1st go live. We also would mention that the town has voted to implement a new utility, which is stormwater, and the solid waste and recycling systems and programs that were previously being billed through another vendor are moving to NISC. And what that means is that our staff are having to basically spin up 2 new programs and look at the bill print impacts, look at the customer service impact in terms of calls, our third-party call handling center for overflow and nights and weekends, and getting them up to speed. So it's a lot of the things that we need to do for time of day. we're doing 2 times already right now, and it's literally happening right now. We're getting emails nearly every day from Public Works for additional deliverables that are needed from staff here. We are spinning up a new marketing vendor we've never worked with. The vendor is Questline. They come highly recommended, and they've done this before, but it is a new process, and it's a new contact for us. Again, I mentioned the NISC bill print update is usually longer. We think they can get something basic, but we are a little concerned about the amount of time we have to vet that. As I mentioned, the meter reading, there are some gaps. We've done an extensive review with NISC on some of, or sorry, with Eaton rather, on some of the concerns that we have, but there is a formal project closeout network analysis that they have yet to do that would basically shift us from an implementation customer to a completed customer and then just an ongoing support customer. And that has not taken place yet. And that's really that guarantee that we're getting 99.5% or better of the hourly readings. And that has not completed yet. You know, we're nearly in October. And then staff transitions. Obviously, Carol has retired. She's sticking on board a little bit to try to help out with this process. But we do have a brand new person, and we have other, you know, retirements coming in the next year. So, you know, we just need to address the bank of knowledge that we have among staff. And then the other concern we have is that sticking to a 1-1 go live, communicating that out to everybody, but then having one of those 3 critical elements not work well, and then having to push the go live at the last minute can really confuse people. That they're going to, you know, they might not hear the postponement, or they might only hear the postponement and get confused. So we think it's really important to pick a date that we think we can live with and stick to, so that we don't miscommunicate and cause confusion among customers. And then, you know, rolling out a pilot program before full launch was something that the board had preferred. It would allow us to do some real world testing. We could have Light board members or other friends of the Light plant kind of opt into a small program where they could be presented a second bill so they could see what it looks like and give feedback. Some things would be able to be changed, tweaks, move this here, move that there. But, you know, with our vendors being the ones doing the programming, we really can't promise that we could fully redesign the bill in just a couple of months, but we certainly could say that font is too small, or that, you know, small things like that, where we could actually gather some feedback and insights from folks to fine tune the process. So I think that, you know, talking to Mark Beauchamp from UFS, asking him, as we did earlier, about the rates and the implementation of time of day, if there was any impact, if we went live in January versus say April. Our rates for next year are revenue neutral, meaning we don't need additional revenue. So when we go live is not as important as it is in a typical year, because we're really trying to peg that to our revenue requirements for the year. So what I have next is like a proposed timeline if we actually went live on April 1st rather than January 1st. We can walk through it. We can also understand what the implications would be if we tried to push this to a January 1st go live. So we've already had kickoff meetings with our marketing vendor, and we let them know that at the last board meeting on September 10th, we were supposed to have this conversation. I had additional slides in here about January 1st and what it might look like. As more time goes by, we're more concerned about our ability to hit that date, but we will definitively, once we have a date selected, tell them this is the date. So now we can start scheduling those 30, 60, 90-day campaigns and start getting those materials ready. If we're doing a 90-day campaign, that gives us basically a week to prepare those materials, and we have not been added yet to their document library to even see them. We also need to work on finalizing the bill print work for stormwater and solid waste recycling, and then addressing those metering gaps that we still have. In October, this is when we could potentially familiarize ourselves with the content library of the available media from the marketing firm to see which elements are really going to resonate the most with Concordians and which kind of different tailored campaigns we could do. We'd be continuing to work on and vet the bill print explainer and the calculator. If you'll recall, we're hoping to have a dynamic web page with a sample bill where people can hover over certain concepts like the table or the graphs, and it can explain to them how this is different from the old bill and what it represents. And so we've got that in the works. We're also going to continue to work on the bill print design and then addressing kind of the remaining communication issues. In November, the landing page for all the campaigns will be done. We actually have one today just so that it's ready. And then work on those final tools and the bill print design. Again, hopefully we'll be getting close to finalize in November, December. We will identify our list of target audiences. So some information will be broadcast to every customer that we have. Other lists may be more targeted. You have an EV, enroll in connected homes that will help you with time of day. You have solar. Here's some information on how solar net billing will work under the new system. So we can identify different lists based on how we plan to communicate to different folks. And then this is when the internal staff training could begin in December, where we start having waves of folks getting trained on all the materials and helping them do customer bill impacts, because that's a common question even today. People call and say, my bill went up $20 this month. Can you walk me through that? So it's going to be very different time of day. There's going to be a lot more analysis required. In January, that's when the 90-day campaign would kick off, including all the bill inserts. We may have a bill insert ready before then. I know Carol had prepared several already. And then we will start publicizing all the tools that people have, continuing that internal staff training, and then starting with the bill print testing. At this point, the bill print design should be done, and we can have a decent amount of time to make sure that everything programmed is correct. And then installing that other communication equipment that we might need to do for the meters to make sure we're getting all of that. And then the 60-day campaign in February, additional community outreach. So basically those first few months of the year after the holidays will be critical communication times. That was another concern that we had with the January 1st go live, is that November, December are critical communication months, and those are months where people are often very distracted with travel or holiday planning. And then, March would be the 30-day campaign, and that would really be the final push. More bill inserts, more community outreach, and then our after hours call center will get trained as well, then the overflow call center, so that they understand the FAQs that people might be asking and how they can help customers. Again, our goal is for our after hours to not just take a message, but to really help customers as much as they can. So if they have questions and they can answer them, they will. And then doing the final testing, and then a go live of April. So as we approach the launch, I think that the final preparations are critical, and we really need a comprehensive system review before we do that. And so this is just, again, those three main buckets of making sure that the customers are educated, the systems are integrated, and that we have thorough testing of everything before we go live. That was the end of my presentation, so I will figure out how to stop sharing. There we go. And
thanks. Well, thanks for looking forward to this process of clear education for the community and modeling clear education through that very well-organized presentation. Let's take comments. I would just say, personally, looking at it, it seems really desirable to put off the launch to April 1. It just seems really hard to do it on January 1, but let's see what other folks say. John, then Chris, then Brian.
Yeah, I guess I would, another point I would make to support April 1st go live date is April is kind of the shoulder season, right? So customers' electricity requirements are lower. I think that, right, the rates will be a little bit lower in that season as well. So I think that that suggests that there's less likely to be, major bill impacts, which I think will increase the risk that customers get, have real issues here. And I just think it supports a smoother transition.
Oh, interesting point. Thank you, John. Chris.
I was going to make that same point, but I guess I had been under the impression that January 1st was the date that we were working towards and that staff wanted. And it sounds like the recommendation from the folks at the light plant, Jason and everyone, is that you do want to delay this to April. I think that's fine. Yeah, I like that it's revenue neutral, so it's not going to have a fiscal impact. And it makes a lot of sense to do it at a time when people's bills are lower and people are paying attention.
Great, thank you. Brian.
Yeah, I agree with the other comments. I would like to ask that the board do a public forum on this topic. At some point in the schedule, have a 1 hour session where we're, at the town hall and available to talk just about this and not so much reiterate the marketing strategy, but really talk about the philosophy and why we're doing this and how this will help customers and kind of give them that sense. I think there's some people that would really benefit from that. The other small concern, which is more funny than anything, April Fool's Day. Is there any chance we could move it off of April Fool's Day and not make it seem like a
I mean, I think, April 1st is the start of the next quarter. I think we do have quarterly reports. There's a benefit to having it be April 1st, but I certainly understand the concern of people. I think it's a joke. If they've been hit for 3 to 6 months with marketing, I think they'll probably not assume that it's a joke, but
Okay.
and so hopefully on April 1st, there's very little that customers are seeing different on that day. So it's not like it's being announced on April 1st. I think that would be perceived as the joke, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also think if you do that in the marketing, I would emphasize the April and not the first.
Right.
Yeah.
That time of use rates are starting in April and not time of use rates are starting on April 1st. Um, I think Brian's suggestion for a public forum is a good one. I don't know what other folks on the board have to say about that. Any other comments about this proposed move of the launch of time of day rates to April 1? Should we take a vote on that then? Does somebody want to make a motion?
I don't think it's necessary, but I'm willing to make a motion. I move that we change the target date from January 1st to April 1st for time of day rates to be implemented.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you,
Bianca.
Bianca. And Bianca, do you want to vote?
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Thank you very much, everybody. So let's move on to our next topic, which is network geothermal. And I'll turn it back to Jason.
Hello. So with us today, we have Brad Hubbard Nelson, and he's going to give a brief presentation on this. And Brad, I do have your slides pulled up, and would you like me to share the presentation or the explain?
I've made some changes to slides just to simplify
Okay.
them. I haven't added anything. So if I could share it, that would be
Sure.
helpful.
1 second. All right. So you should be
Okay.
able to share now.
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you. This is I'm Brad Hubbard Nelson from the Climate Action Committee. I'm also a board member of the Heat Smart Alliance. Been working on sort of air source heat pump stuff since the Heat Smart program we had in 2018. Though I'm not a professional, I'm very interested in this. I'm going to assume that board members all know what geothermal heating is. It's the highest efficiency that you can option that people use, taking heat or from the ground. Got a coefficient of performance, multiplier on efficiency of greater than 4 generally. And it's independent of outdoor temperature, which is unlike air source heat pumps. And there's no outdoor compressors. But it's generally so expensive that you need good incentives and because of the wells that need to be dug. And so there's a fairly small number of buildings. There's a number of buildings in town, including Orchard House and a couple at the Middlesex School that use geothermal. Network geothermal is a newer concept, but it's the same technology, just extending it and it's been promoted by the nonprofit called HEAT. And there's a nice webinar on the Clean Energy States Alliance. So I know one of the board members knows about this. Instead of providing gas to buildings, the utility could provide heat or cooling through a thermal network, and it would be a pipe connecting all the buildings, each with a ground source heat pump inside it. And the network would include a number of wells with capacity to heat and cool the buildings at the temperature expected. Now, from a climate perspective, which is what keeps me up at night, we are trying to reduce emissions very quickly over the next 25 years. And buildings are the biggest sector. And in order to meet our goal of 85% emissions reduction or better, we pretty much have to electrify all buildings that can be electrified. But the way it's going now is customer adoption is pretty slow. It is complicated. It's expensive to do individual buildings one by one. We're hoping that district heating with network geothermal could accelerate electrification through streamlined procurement and economies of scale and make it a planned transmission. Now, we're doing pretty well on our greenhouse gas emissions as shown in this graph, but that's largely because of the emissions-free electricity that CMLP has made. And that's the low-hanging fruit. From now on, it gets harder. From the utilities perspective, geothermal networks have a potential to avoid bad peaking costs in the future. When you get full electrification, the winter peaks are expected to dominate and be more severe than the summer peaks are today. Now in the graph, you can see the green is kind of, this is not the peak, this is total usage month by month through the year, and I think it's nationwide. But you can see the scenarios for full electrification, and if you did it with air source heat pumps with a coefficient of performance of 2, you have much bigger peaks in the winter than you do currently in the summer. So to any extent that we can electrify a lot of our buildings with geothermal, you get a much smaller peaking problem, and that'll lower costs for the utility and our customers. Network geothermal, you see, is a little lower than just the ground source heat pumps. That's due to some of the properties of being able to share different cooling and heating loads among buildings. Customers should appreciate the benefits through lower electricity rates and lower all total costs. And also, we hope that if we do this, it'll be a lot easier process for homeowners and business owners to undertake. Okay. So there's some other advantages, and this is kind of in the workforce. The gas utility, which we assume would be a collaborator in this and helping to run it, would have a new business as opposed to just losing their old business. And they're good at maintaining underground networks, dealing with customers, and it's a solution for the gas infrastructure that is aging and needs to be fixed and maintained. And if you rely on just people getting off of gas over decades the people who can least afford it would end up stuck with the maintenance cost of the network. We also hope over time to avoid unnecessary spending on gas pipe replacements. Right now, the gas companies are spending about $1.5 billion a year in Massachusetts replacing gas pipes. And considering that they would be retired relatively soon, or might be, this would be a waste of money. Now, the Department of Public Utilities and the Healy administration considers this a promising technology, the network geothermal, to help meet our net zero goal. So the GSEP, the Gas System Enhancement Program, is the mechanism that gas utilities are using to recover the costs. And the latest climate bill in 2024 allows GSEP to pay for pipe retirement or repair as well as replacement. And it directs the Department of Public Utilities to consider non-pipeline alternatives. So these things are for example, Concord has some projects which National Grid has labeled as non-pipeline alternatives because of their location and potential to do something else there, electrify buildings in particular. Two of them are residential, and one is on Thoreau is a mix of residential and commercial. Now, ideally, in my mind, the two utilities would work together, and National Grid might run underground network, and CMLP might be more involved above the ground in helping residents as trusted partners in retrofitting their homes. And in order for this to work, it has to be financially a good business for all the parties. And so analyzing the economics, the business model, as well as the technology in the next year or two is important. Now here is a view for how network geothermal could unroll in Concord. And it's just my view. In the next couple of years, investigating technology and business model for networks in collaboration with the two utilities and other communities that have the same issues, other MLP communities. I think it would be useful to design and implement a relatively small pilot project at a suitable site in the next few years, and then designing and implementing a geothermal network for the MCI Concord redevelopment. That's an ideal site, as I'll mention later, just because it's designed from scratch. In the early 30s, we could plan and implement general geothermal networks for multifamily housing and commercial districts in town. And then in the late 30s and 40s, we could implement network geothermals through the dense packed zoning and less dense zoning parts of town, the orange and pink parts. And that would cover a good fraction of the population of Concord. I don't remember off that time. My hope, and we have to learn this through the first couple of steps, is this would be a manageable public investment that would strengthen our utilities business in the long term. Now, you may have heard about the first in a nation pilot in Framingham. They've given tours. It's very interesting, and it's worked out very well. This is an Eversource territory, and it's summarized in many presentations. It was proposed in 2022, funded by Department of Energy, and operational in 2024. That was pretty quick. Includes housing authority buildings, commercial and residences. And they had 100% participation of buildings. And that's because Eversource paid the entire bill for retrofitting your house, as well as guaranteed they would put back in the gas stuff if it didn't work out. But the average retrofit cost per home, single family homes, I believe, was $40,000. That's kind of in line with what it costs to retrofit your house with air source heat pumps. And then so that was building conversions, the 33%. The rest of it, the rest of the budget in this pie chart is the bore field, where there's a lot of wells in a parking lot. There's actually a couple of bore fields, but that's the main one, and other things. But this is a pilot project. This was the first in the nation, so things should not be more expensive than this, and it's I don't remember the total cost at the top of my head, but um, the network has worked so well and has been studied by heat. It's been instrumented and studied, and they are working on a phase 2, the next network over in the next year or two. So there are some possible projects we could do in town if we could figure out how to plan them, get the community engaged, and get them funded. For example, a couple of those GSEP projects. Emerson Hospital is doing a very large capital investment, and Newbury Court is building a new neighborhood right next to it. And Concord Green is an example of a multifamily development, which might be potentially easy to do, and has commercial buildings nearby. We haven't explored these in great depth. We've had a working group, including a couple members of the Climate Action Committee and residents, and Jason and Laura have attended, which we appreciate. Now let's see, where did I go? Hit that. The MCI Concord, as I mentioned, we think is a promising site for a geothermal network for a few reasons. It requires fossil-free new construction. We assume it's gonna have commercial and residential, and sharing those different loads makes the system more efficient. It's got a wastewater treatment plant, and it's got a river nearby. Both of those are very nice thermal resources potentially. So you might need many less wells. And the consultant they are using has experience at least analyzing these networks. I don't know if they've put them in so we think Concord could propose this as a primary alternative and potentially get some funding from the environmental bond bill that was passed this year. So my last slide. I think this is a promising new technology that Concord should try to understand and figure out whether it is in the utilities' interest and the people's interest. And I should say that Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MIPC, applied for some funding to help us study this, and together with a couple other MLP towns, which have the same sort of similar business issues. And that would be funding that we could start this study in 2026. And we'd like to ask the CMLP and the Light Board to support this work, help work with us to understand the benefits and costs for CMLP and residents, and assist with business and technology modeling in this coming year. Help us seek funding for a pilot project, and also to try to get a stake in the ground for proposing this for MCI Concord as a preferred option. That's what I had to say. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for that interesting presentation. What questions does anybody have? Bianca?
Thank you, Brad, for this. It's terrific. I love the idea. I just have a few comments that I wanted to make. First, the timeline seems long. I would have liked a shorter timeline. And I think it's shorter timeline, at least on a pilot project, it would hopefully be possible with something like MCI. Second, on the cost of the retrofits, you said it would be $40,000 roughly per home. I think that cost must be, it's interesting because we did our own, we have not done air source heat pumps much for the same reason that the efficiency for us just versus the investment didn't make any sense, and we wanted to do some ground source. And we've looked into it. It doesn't require wells, actually. There's new technology now that you can just basically, tear out the yard and do a horizontal layout of pipes and then put new grass on top. And the quote that we got was $48,000. That was before rebates. So my hope is that that $40,000 is something would come down quite a bit, because for 50 you could get your own without it being networked. And then for CMLP, I think the business proposal that you have for CMLP, I'm not sure works. Because CMLP is in the business of distributing power and electricity, and what you had was basically, transforming it into, helping out with construction bidding and so forth, which is totally out of the scope of what the light plant does. And the staff is already pretty stretched. We've already had staffing issues. The focus is really on delivering power, efficiently
Yes.
at a low rate and consistently. So my proposal, or my I guess my idea back to you would be maybe to make that something that the Climate Action Committee could maybe do, to provide that, obviously on a volunteer basis, but somehow just help out with the contracting for homeowners that, would want that. That's just my 2 cents. So
Thanks for those
Look,
comments. Chris, before we go to you, let me ask Brad if he wants to respond to any of Bianca's comments, because she raised a bunch of interesting issues.
yes, sure. And I'd love to talk to you about it. I don't think people in Massachusetts are doing the horizontal round one because it freezes here. But maybe I hadn't heard that people are doing that. The cost of retrofitting a home is mostly putting in ductwork and stuff like that. And as all homes are different, a large home in Massachusetts, in Concord, may cost a lot more than that. Just the internal work within a home. So that is, so when I might not have explained it, I'm thinking doing a procurement of preferred contractors and making sure and running it together with the Climate Action Committee, but volunteers can only do so much, just to make the process easier, but sell a lot of electricity. That's what CMLP wants to do. So and it's not just the more the better. It's that peaking issue, which we think might be nasty if we do it. If people's heating systems all get lower and lower efficiency as you get colder and colder.
Thank you, Brad. Chris.
Yeah, that's why we need batteries too. But I mean, this is like my day job. I do a lot with these sorts of systems. We recently completed a study with a private school up in New Hampshire that has 57 buildings connected to a steam plant, and they're basically doing a network geothermal system over the next 25 years to heat and cool their campus. So it's happening all over the place, and it's great that we're looking at it here. And I think the MCI Concord location is a really amazing opportunity where we're going to get a complete redo of an area, and it makes sense to put the right infrastructure in, which would be network geothermal. And I think there's some interesting opportunities with the river and the wastewater treatment plant there as well that could really help the efficiencies of that. So I'm strongly supportive. I would also love us to push the Newbury Court project, even if they're not going to do network geothermal, if the town could encourage them to do geothermal. I think that would be great. My basic question here is this something the town does, or do we want National Grid to do this? And what are the pros and cons of it being done by an investor-owned utility versus by it being done by us? I think that's really the thing I'd like to hear a little bit more about.
Yeah, so this is to be determined. You guys are the business side of CMLP in my view, and I think of CMLP as a real trusted partner, and as a local kind of someone to go to and say, oh, what do I do? What do we do? Oh, you know, it's not a huge role besides selling electricity. Now, I remember talking to Brian last summer, or maybe it was 2 summers ago, about maybe CMLP would be selling the thermal instead of the electricity. Um, there's different ways you could do the business, and it's certainly not my expertise.
Thanks. Brian.
Yeah, so the I was surprised when you mentioned that you would have CMLP partnering with National Grid. That seems murky. So, National Grid replacing gas lines with this network geothermal and having their project happen, but not CMLP involvement, I think is a good idea. And areas that the natural gas is not in that has these same density profiles, I think CMLP would probably be a better lead for those. But the working together is usually gets surprisingly complicated. And so I that was the only concern I had. The one suggestion, as you saw with the whole presentation, lots of information on every slide. The one thing that gets picked out is what people can digest, which is 40 grand per customer. I suggest, instead of thinking through the typical installation with ductwork and all of the other add-ons for specific people and then finding some kind of average, is first talk about what does it cost to connect your home to this network. Just the device that goes in your basement that actually provides the water, and what is the cost to recoup the network part that's out on the street, and kind of give that number as well to say, oh, it cost 10 grand or whatever the number is to have this device in your basement and to support the installation of the geothermal network in the street. And then your home may have an additional 30,000 in ductwork or other things. So I think it would be good to give both those numbers so that people understand this is the
Right.
basic cost to connect, and then your home may have some adders that could be significant. And here's some examples.
Thank you.
Sure. Those were pilot numbers based on a
Yes.
first in the nation thing. So it's, I didn't intend those meant that's what it would be.
Yeah,
But yeah.
but you got to know your audience. They'll pick that out.
That is true. John.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's, well, I guess first of all, thanks, Brett. This is a great presentation, lots of good, really good information. It's my understanding that what you're looking for is kind of some evidence of support from the Light Plant Board. And yeah, I'm very supportive. I think that the economics, can be challenging in some instances. It's probably going to make most sense where there's the greatest density. And there are, as have been pointed out by various board members, there are all kinds of challenging business and commercial issues to sort through. But I think it's definitely something that it makes sense to have staff provide some support to, recognizing that they're really in a position to kind of understand customers and the electricity side the best. So supportive of that. I think that in terms of its ultimate application, we'll need to see the numbers, and and I think that to the degree that we can get funding from the state for a pilot, that will make it that much easier. So thank you for your good work.
Thank you. Chris, before we go to you, all the other board members have had a chance to weigh in. I'll put in my 2 cents and then we'll go to Chris and Bianca. I agree with John's comments just now about being supportive of CMLP investigating this and staff spending time looking into it and seeing where it goes. My perspective on this is that this is new technology. It's expensive technology, and it's going to be much, much, much more cost effective in locations where it's new construction, where you're not taking out a working existing heating system and putting something new in. The place where it's worth dealing with existing infrastructure in the early stage is in a case where National Grid has said they have to replace their gas lines anyway for some reason. And so I would love for us to give the highest priority to new construction like MCI Concord and Newbury Court and Emerson Hospital, where you're not talking about replacing an existing system and something new needs to go in there. And we don't want to be extending the natural gas infrastructure into new locations. But that's my sense of it. Chris.
Yeah, just a couple quick follow-up reactions. So first of all, it isn't actually new technology, right? So I mean, I did geothermal for Harvard in 2003 and for City of Cambridge in 2002. So those have been running 20 plus years. The heat pumps that you'd end up with in your house, water source heat pumps, go back to at least the 1970s. So it's a new application in a way at this scale, but it's not a new technology. And the stuff that goes in the ground, the boreholes, have a very long lifespan. They're typically, well over the lifespan of the individual pieces of heat pump equipment. And so it has a track record of being very reliable. The one thing that's changing is the heat pump technology continues to improve. And so one of the barriers that a lot of homes have, in my home is like this, is we have a hydronic heating system. So we have radiators, and it's based on 180-degree water. And so a heat pump right now, the ones that I could put in my house will only make about 130-degree water, which means I do need to put in ducts and such if I want to have this kind of system. That technology is changing. They now have heat pumps that they're doing at an industrial scale that'll make steam. And high temperature heat pumps are definitely coming as we look at different refrigerants. So, I think back to my original thought was that $40,000 number. That I agree with Brian and Bianca. That just jumps out at you as, boy, I don't want this. And it should really vary based on the application. And we might want to stay away from that or give a range that includes the possibility that it's a very low cost if you've already got a house that does have a forced air type heating system. It could be very cost effective to do that. And the cost of doing it at your home, the big cost is the wells, the borehole field. However, you're going to do that, horizontal or vertical. And usually you do vertical because you get more capacity out of it that way. But that's avoided. That's what the plant owns. That's what the utility owns. That's not what the homeowner owns. And so for the homeowner, they're going to, all that stuff's out of your building and you don't have to worry about it. So I'm also very supportive, and I think I could talk about this for a couple hours, so I better stop.
Good. Then let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk again, Brad. We'll get some coffee.
Yeah, it's great we have someone on the board like Chris who actually has real world experience with geothermal systems. So thanks for sharing your perspective. Bianca.
Yeah, so just following on, echoing Brian and Chris's comments on the cost. And Chris probably knows way more on this, but the gentleman who gave us the bid for the horizontal pipes, he apparently does this all over Massachusetts, all over New England, for residential applications. And it's something like it's 6 feet under, so it doesn't have to go like way deep well, but it's a 6 foot, I don't know, some kind of hole, and it doesn't have to be all over the yard. It just it winds around. So anyway, that's just like something to think about. And, you know, I can provide the name of the gentleman who provided the quote, but,
Sure,
you know,
that'd be
Chris
great.
probably knows a lot more about this than I do. So just wanted to offer that.
Thanks.
Thank you. So are there any more board questions or comments? I think we're pretty much out of time, and I think the general sense is that the board is supportive of investigating this, and I hope the staff has gotten the message that they are encouraged to cooperate with the Concord Climate Action Committee and see where all of this goes. And especially, it is timely with all the planning for MCI Concord to make sure that we and the staff are prepared to support as appropriate.
Okay.
Jason, do you have any questions for the board about this? Or do you feel you have enough guidance here?
I feel I have enough guidance right now. I think, just in the future, if grant applications come up or other decision points come up, it might be worth having a discussion about it. But, as Brad mentioned, Laura and I have been attending, one of us or both of us have been attending as many of those meetings as we can to just understand what the ask is and see how we can lend our resources to help. And so we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, and it's clear, as Brian was saying earlier, there are lots of questions about how this should be structured and what the role of CMLP is compared to National Grid, but that's for down the road. Okay, thank you, and thank you very much, Brad, for
Sure.
bringing this to our attention.
Thank you.
Jason, do you want to go on to solar?
Yep. So I'd like to give the board an update on the middle school solar and storage project. I'm going to share my screen. So this project has been years in the making, and I know there are some like Brian who's been intimately involved in the project, and so we really wanted to give an update of where we are. First, just a brief history for those who don't recall, but CMLP did get borrowing authorization at town meeting for $7.5 million for about a 1.2 megawatt solar, which was meant to be rooftop plus canopy, and then energy storage, which was thought to either be 1 or 2 megawatts by 4 megawatt hours. And the purpose of the battery is to absorb the excess solar to not create further solar saturation issues on the distribution system. This was a CMLP funded project that would be funded with ratepayer dollars, separate from the school. The cost and the revenue generated from this is for ratepayers. And there was strong desire for coordination to do along with the construction of the school. We did do a lot of elements, including making sure we had infrastructure for a switchboard in the utility area, as well as the drainage and the conduits for all the canopies, so we wouldn't ever have to dig up the parking lots or any other areas. But because of some issues with construction and the timeline of the school was incredibly tight, they were trying to fit a project into a timeline that was so narrow. That coordination was potentially putting the project at risk, and so we needed to slow down and make sure that their primary construction completed on time and didn't cost additional taxpayer money. And then also, we heard a lot of feedback from other light plants and other cities and towns that had done solar on schools, especially new schools, and they stated it was really important to try to make sure that that building was completed and that the roof was sort of certified and tested before installing anything, even if it was non-penetrating, because of the risk of blaming different parties for any water or damage on the roof. There were instances where equipment went up too soon, and then the contractor who had warrantied the roof for a year no longer warrantied the roof, and then the light planner, people putting on the solar, had to bear the costs of that. So we bid this through Chapter 3039M, and doing so, we were doing it as a utility, purchasing basically power production equipment that is going to be installed in a public building. To do that, we needed a site license from the school. We could not go out to bid until we had that site license approved by the school committee, and that happened relatively late in the game. So in terms of the bid structure, it's a little complicated because we wanted to both get pricing on the two different portions of the project, the rooftop and the canopy separately. We didn't want just one all-in price. And we also wanted to look at the domestic content requirements to get the Inflation Reduction Act money. I'll refer to that as IRA or ITC money, but basically money back that CMLP would get if we hit certain requirements. And, if we make domestic content requirements, we get more money back. If we don't, we get less money back. So it was bid as a rooftop solar system as the base bid, and then an optional canopy system, and then alternates for both for meeting the domestic content requirements. It was an invitation for bid. I mentioned 3039M, and that means that we have to award the project to the lowest eligible and responsible bidder. So, and when we do an RFP, you can actually create criteria and you can subjectively score those bidders based on the criteria. Under this IFB process, we have to award it to the lowest eligible responsible bidder. Now, that being said, we do need assurances that the bidder to be eligible and responsible can complete a project of this size and scope at a school in the manner that we are requesting. So it doesn't mean that, if you created a solar business tomorrow with your cousin that you guys could bid on this project and be selected. It has to be somebody who has demonstrated they can do projects of this scope and size. And then, as I mentioned, the domestic content was the alternate for the solar. So in terms of like what's maybe changed since we bid this out originally, obviously inflation has been crazy in the last few years. Another thing that we learned after kind of the scope of and the estimates went in to the financial modeling was the soil conditions, which meant that the piers supporting the canopies had to be somewhere between 30 and 80 feet, depending on which one it was. They had to test that the soil conditions based on the load and the engineering of that. So that really increased the size and complexity of those. Also, I'd say doing it when there's a parking lot and finished landscaping is also kind of probably requires different equipment and approach than if it's a active construction site. There's a little bit of uncertainty around the tax credits. This changed a little bit with a recent bill that was passed, but we feel we are on strong ground to have this a project start date in 2024, which is good because that's when we laid the conduit, purchased some equipment, did some scoping and some bid design work, and spent a chunk of money then. And so we have project inception in 2024, but there is still uncertainty around this and the eligibility for domestic content. We feel like we have really good guidance. We've been using Baker Tilly for that, and but sometimes those rules change, and so that's just some uncertainty there. And then battery siting concerns. So the school and the architects for the school were really the ones who were involved in choosing where a proposed battery may go. There's not a lot of free room on that property because of the nearby wellhead and water issues, and then the having to put a school on a property where there was already a school. And so the area chosen is really adjacent to their gym, theater end of the building. And, it's somewhere between 40 and 60 feet away from the side of the building, which is a buffer for sure. It's also on top of natural gas line that feeds their backup generator. And it's pretty close to the school. Now, there's no concern that it could be safely built and constructed in a way that, didn't lead to danger, but I think there's some concern from the school and maybe from their population and their constituents about putting something that could be hazardous so close to a school and also so close to a well area. If a battery, ignites or explodes and there is firefighting foam or other materials, the water sprayed on it, often they're not putting water on batteries anymore, they're letting them burn, but they would put water on the structure to prevent it from catching fire. And there's just a concern that, that water is going to drain somewhere and, could it pollute something? In terms of pricing estimates, the rooftop solar was estimated about $2.50 a watt. and the canopy solar was estimated at $3.50 a watt. The school would rarely, if ever, push back with just the rooftop solar alone. And so we always thought of this as, if it's a rooftop only, we don't need a battery at this site. The canopy is bigger than the rooftop and would, the reason why the size was chosen was to make the school net zero based on estimates, before the school was even constructed. And that means that there are times where the solar will not produce nearly enough energy for the school, and it will have to import from the grid. But that means that it would be offset by extra solar production at other times of the year. And that's what the battery is really for, that extra solar production that the school can't use. So if we do the rooftop only, we would not need a battery, which would just change the scope of the project. I will also mention that the battery made the cost more favorable. Canopy solar is definitely the most expensive solar. Ground mounted is the cheapest, then rooftop, then canopy. The battery did help the economics of the project because batteries make money. And so overall, when you look at the total project, it would be more favorable with a battery. Here are some of the costs that were presented at like town meeting and some of the financial analysis that was done beforehand. And again, the project cost was either at or a little bit more than the borrowing authorization. I think the borrowing authorization was originally $11 million in the warrant, but then at town meeting, what was moved was $7.5 million. All right, so I'm going to start talking about the bids we got back. They were due last week. And I just want to caution everybody that things are in a very preliminary state. This is a public bid process, and we need to follow the law. And if we don't follow the law, that can lead to exposures, legal exposures for the light plant and for ratepayers. So we want to be very careful about the things that we say when we have an open bid process. The bids themselves are public, which is why I'm going to give you kind of some price range information on what the bids came back as. But I can tell you that we've not awarded the bid, and there's still a process ongoing. So I just wanted to clarify that before I kind of talked about the bids. So we did get 2 bid packages that we received.
Excuse me, Jason, before you go forward, could you clarify what you're looking for from the board here?
Yeah,
After you go through these bids, are you looking for our responses to the bid? Is this all informational or is it something else?
I think so. I think the primary focus is this is a project update so that we know, everybody knows where the process is today. But I think that we're not looking for feedback on you should award this bid or that bid, but we are looking for, if we start talking about the scope of the project and, people like the idea of that or they don't like the idea of that, that's fine to talk about. But I don't think that we want to say, I think this bid sounds better than that bid, because we're not there yet. And my next slide kind of outlines where we are in the bid award process.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, the first step is looking at the bids themselves and determining if they've met all of the requirements. There are many, many requirements in this invitation for bid. It was written by our legal counsel, and after extensive review, went out to the public. So, we look for things that are required in the bid to make sure that they're there. The next step is that we have to make sure that they're eligible bidders and that they meet the definitions laid out in the invitation for bid. And that's where we are. And really the biggest step in that is reaching out to all of the previous project owners that were given as references to understand how those projects went, and so that we can be certain that these are eligible and responsible bidders. That process is ongoing, so I can't really say if both or either of these bidders are eligible and responsible yet, but I can certainly give some information about the pricing and talk about what the implications of that are. So right now, the rooftop bids that came in are in the $3 to $7 range. And again, the estimate was $2.50 a watt, and the canopy came in the $3 to $6 range. So a little bit lower on one end, much, much higher on the other end. The next slide is, I really want to underscore the complexity of this. Lowest responsible and eligible bidder. We are not required to take the lowest price of the bid if they are not a responsible and eligible bidder. So we are still vetting these, and we can't, I wish we had a couple more weeks before this presentation, but the next light board meeting is dedicated to the ETS discussions. But we did want to get something on here and, educate the board on the process. But we are going to be providing a lot more information once the review process is complete. We have been coordinating very carefully with the school and keeping the superintendent and the assistant superintendent apprised, and let them know that they will have a chance to be involved in the scheduling of the project and things that happens. Remember that the alternates and the options are not required, but they do require careful vetting to determine if they make sense or if they're even financially feasible with the amount of money that we've borrowed. I mentioned Baker Tilly advising us on the ITC eligibility. And then one thing I can say is that with the alternate bids that meet the domestic content requirements, I can tell you that there seems to be not much of a financial incentive for us to go with the domestic content bids, because it would be roughly the same with the extra credit as it would be if we did not force the domestic content. And there may be some additional risk there, but that we'll have a full financial analysis of that. Once we determine if we have an eligible and responsible bidder, we would then start talking about whether we're going to do the optional or alternate projects or just the base bid. And again, I just reiterated that this is a public bid process and it's guided by statute. And then in terms of next steps, we are going to continue vetting these the projects completed by the bidders. They did give references. I can tell you we've had a challenging time identifying and communicating with some of those references. So that's why it's taken a little bit more time than we would have liked. We are working with counsel. Counsel's been very helpful in answering a lot of questions and making sure that we follow the legal path and not open ourselves up to any exposure. And then we are trying to keep stakeholders like the school, the town manager, the light board apprised on the process and kind of where we are. And then we do want, whatever results, we want a successful project that moves forward so that the school feels like it's successful, the parents, the teachers, the light board, the ratepayers. We want this to be a positive situation for everybody. I'm going to stop sharing. I think I'll just say again, in terms of feedback, again, we're not looking for the board to say, oh, that sounds like a great bid, we should take that bid or not take that bid, because we really are not in a place to vet that. But I think that any discussion or questions about the projects, the alternates, the options, things that you're concerned about or you're happy about, those things I think are fine for discussion.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions or comments from the board? Brian, then John. You're on mute.
Thank you. It sounds like with the battery especially, that the design, everything else, it seems to be, safe and effective, and it's the perception at the schools or their community that seems to be the concern. Is that a good way to reflect those comments? Because a lot of it was,
Right.
the batteries here, there is a natural gas line, but it's not a concern from the technical experts. And there's a building, but there's not a concern from the technical experts. And then there seems to be some real concern from the community, though,
Right.
despite that.
Well, I can tell you that would be the first utility scale battery going in Concord. There's definitely some uncertainty from public safety, from the inspectors, because this is the first one, right? We did meet with an insurance engineer who basically walked us through battery safety and best practices, and he was asked the direct question, like, would you put a battery here at the school? And he said, well, if it were up to an insurance company, we'd put the battery in a desert 100 miles away from everybody. But the reality is that batteries need to go where they're needed, and they're usually needed near energy sources or energy users. And so the key is to figure out how to develop them and build them as safely as possible without creating any exposure or loss. And can that be done anywhere? For sure. Will it add to the cost of the project? Yes. There could be additional steps taken, like building blast walls or other construction that was not originally planned that could make this safer. I think there's also a concern about putting multiple units close together. That's another energy practice that's evolving, the safe distance between them. Some were built a long time ago with 5 or 8 feet between different containers. Now that distance is much further, and I don't know what exactly will fit in that particular area. There are other battery chemistries like zinc that can be considered. They're far less energy dense. They would not have the same expected capacity and runtime. But so I think a little bit of it is that there's uncertainty everywhere. I think I talked about in the past, from the fire department's perspective, what they want is they want to see a proposal, and then they want to take that proposal and give it to the state fire marshal's office, who actually has the resources to look at this and determine if this is a safe project from their perspective, because they don't have the resources in-house and haven't vetted projects like this before. But the way that the bidding world works is that we solicit bids, we have the design, and then we don't know the chemistry, the number of cells, the number of racks, the number of the cooling system, active, passive, all of those details until we get this information, and then we are committed to accepting that bid. And then it's a question of, do we need to go back and engineer any other safety systems to make sure that the community as a whole is on board with this. So I'd say that's where we are. I think a lot of people just have concerns because their preference would be not to put a battery next to $100 million school filled with children. But the reality is, on the site, there's not a lot of alternatives. I think I might have mentioned a while ago, we were looking at possible alternatives in terms of siting, as we have an abandoned substation nearby. But that has not yet really come to fruition because it involves a lot of coordination. That's an old right of way, and we have to get certain things approved. And there's also a lot of buried infrastructure there that would need to be vetted by civil engineers. So it may be a future possibility, but it's not an easy one.
One more comment. The schools have a mandate from town meeting to make this a net zero property. I don't believe the roof alone can meet that requirement. So if we're not doing canopies, are we upping the efficiency of the panels, or how are we meeting that target?
That's a great question. I think that if we didn't do the canopies, the panels that were designed a couple of years ago, obviously the density has increased. I don't think it's enough to make the school 100% net zero. I think, looking at the vote that was taken at town meeting, if it forced the school and required it, or if it told the school it needed to be net zero ready, we could look into the semantics of how that was voted. But another alternative is taking that solar to make the school net zero and, put like the canopy solar basically and putting that somewhere else where we would like to expand solar, and saying as a total project, it's offset the school's usage, but obviously the site has some limitations and cost implications.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I guess I'm just, Jason, trying to understand. I'm assuming that 2 bids is you're kind of underwhelmed by the response there. Is that a fair characterization?
There were, I believe, 18 or 20 different places that grabbed the RFP or IFB from us. And there were some others that were kind of interested, but chose not to bid. We don't really have the details on why they didn't bid. There was a third bidder who came late to the process, and we were not able to accept their bid because it was not submitted on time. But obviously, the more bids, the more competition, the more options that we would have had. So we would have liked to see more bids.
I guess I would, after the process is complete, would just encourage staff to do kind of a lessons learned experience, right? Because procurements like this are, critical, and being successful in these procurements are essential in terms of, delivering lowest cost to customers. So I just feel like there's probably some lessons to be learned here.
Yeah. Bianca?
So it's mostly a question, as I don't understand the full scope of the, of the project. But is there any chance that, let's say, a set of fast EV chargers could provide some kind of buffer if the battery were not installed? Because I think there's 2 issues with the canopy, right? One is the battery could absorb that power and then also be used as a cost-effective way to put power back to the grid at peak times. But I'm assuming there's also potentially a concern about too much power when there isn't enough usage. Is there any chance that some fast EV chargers placed there, let's say, even if we were to say, hey, everybody, the power during this hour is free, come and charge up your cars. Is there any chance that that would be any kind of a release valve?
No, I don't think so, just because we couldn't guarantee the power being used at that time. And also, level 3 EV chargers are incredibly expensive. It would be more cost effective to curtail the solar ourselves. But, we're seeing prices per kilowatt hour well more than double what we can buy solar elsewhere. So, I think it's also a financial and economic question too, is like, what is the value for ratepayers for constructing the canopies at that price versus, constructing it elsewhere?
Fair enough.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, it's interesting the concern about the batteries. Concord, I think we feel like we're always the first people to do things, but we're actually not. Lexington has batteries at their school. Acton put batteries in. Groton is putting batteries in, owned by the Groton Light Plant. So there's a lot of good places to point to on that. And I would echo the concern about cost, and I think we should be putting in solar where it's most cost effective around town and be less of a fetish about trying to make sure that a particular building is on-site net zero. Think about the town being net zero instead.
Thank you. I had only one question for you, Jason. And that is, you say that the battery improves the economics of the project. Is that the case irregardless whether we do the canopy or not, or is the battery economics linked to doing the canopy?
No, I think the battery economics were linked to the total project as a presentation at town meeting, but the batteries save money wherever they are. And,
Okay.
the battery was meant to absorb some of the excess solar at the site. And so it would be tied to the project logically.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? We're not looking for any decisions here. Thanks for giving us this update. Good luck with taking this to the next step. We'll see where it goes. And let's turn now to liaison and public comments. Do we have any liaison comments from the select board or the finance committee? Hearing none. Do we have any public comments? Pamela Dritt. Thank you.
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. I applaud the idea of making Concord Green a networked geothermal project, because Concord Green wants to change from our gas system to heat pump. Anyway, so National Grid is going to end up without us as customers. It might be a financial incentive for them to consider this. Also, when you're talking about the cost of changing over individual buildings, we have to remember that that is the initial cost, and that's the investment. And it doesn't matter how much it is at the beginning. What matters is how much it saves over the life of it. And we get air conditioning, which most of the older buildings don't have, especially buildings that have radiators tend to be using window unit air conditioning, and climate change caused extreme heat waves are going to make air conditioning necessary for everybody, including old buildings. We're even going to need probably cooling stations for the ones that don't. So please when you talk about the costs, talk about also the costs of not doing it. And include the benefits of the externalized savings for all of Concord generating our own electricity will end up with eventually much cheaper power and clean power and more resilient power. All schools and homes are going to need air conditioning. Also, please stop talking about net zero. We need to switch the term to zero carbon, because zero carbon is what we're trying to do. We're not trying to generate as much clean energy as we burn. No, we're trying to get rid of all of the carbon we burn. We're going to get off fossil fuels, and CMLP is the only route we have to do this.
Hey, Pamela, thank you very much. Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
A second.
Second,
And John,
yes.
Bianca,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
And I say yes as well. So thank you very much. And we'll be back in a few short weeks for another meeting where we will be talking about ETS. So see you folks. Bye now.